Hi guys, welcome to our discussion. So today we are going to look at different types of bones. In our first video, we looked at a summary of the human support system and mentioned some of its functions, which of course assist in the process of movement and support. And apart from that, we said that part of the functions of the skull is to protect the delicate organs which are found especially within the skull and the thorax cavity. And therefore, apart from that, today we are going to look at classifications of these different parts of the bones of the human skeletal system. And we're going to see that this basically is going to be, or rather is going to rely on their shapes and functions in order to designate what basically these bones are. So in that case, we're going to look at four different types of, or rather four different classes of bones, which basically is going to consist of long bones, flat bones, sesamoid bones, and the short bones. Now I'm going to expand this specific structure so that we can be able to, in a summary form, go through the different types of bones of the skeletal system that I've already mentioned in our introductory video, so that we can be able to appreciate their roles. So in this case, I'm going to use both the first and the second illustrations for these skeletal systems, because there are some names, as I said in our first video, which might be used in this particular case, which are missing the first one. So I'm using the two comparatively so that we can be able to understand different parts. So from this particular point, as I said, this part of the human skeletal system is known as the skull, and we say that it is used to protect the delicate part of a human body, which is the skull, and the olfactory organs like the eyes and the nose, the ears, which are found within this region. We say that the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage or the thorax that is being referred to as here forms part of what we call the exoskeleton, whereas the girdle and the rims, of course, form what we call the appendicular skeleton. Now, in this case, the axial and the appendicular skeleton have different types of bones depending on their shapes and functions. And these are going to be classified, of course, in these four categories that I've listed for long bones, flat bones, sesamoid bones, and then the short bones. Now, in this case, this part, as I've said, is the skull. We have the mandible, which is a lower jaw at this particular point that is articulated to the cranium. And then we have the clavicle, which are joined at this particular point. And of course, we can be able to see from this image if this one is not elaborate or maybe clear. This is known as the cervical vertebrae. So this is part of the vertebrae that we're going to see being listed this particular section. So as we can see from this point, this is cervical vertebrae and this lumbar vertebrae, and then we are going to see other parts like the sacrum and the coccyx, which are going to be listed here, forming part of the vertebral column. So apart from the ribs that I've mentioned here and the clavicle, we have what we call a shoulder blade. Now, in a display of the appendicular part of the skeleton, there was a formation of the shoulder blade. These are the part of course, the bones that we said which were the flat bones, which are going to be shown in other illustrations that we're going to discuss. So this front part of the thoracic cavity, which is articulating the ribs to the back part of the vertebral column, is known as the sternum. And in this case, it's being referred to as the sternum, and this is the body of the sternum. And this part of it is a xiphoid process, which is a tip part of the sternum. As I said, this can be explained or rather be mentioned, and this one just be referred to as the sternum. So therefore, this is going to assist us in collaboration with this in order to try and figure out which are some of these parts that we have mentioned which have not been listed. Now, apart from this one, we have this particular bone which is forming part of the upper limb, which is referred to as the humerus. This is part of the articulation of a bone which is joining to the upper part of the thoracic cavity, which is known as the humerus. Now, the humerus is joined to the ulna and the radius, which form part of the limb, which basically leads to the carpus and the metacarpus, the proximal phalanx, and then the dismal phalanx, which are forming part of the hand. So in this case, this part of the left, if we are facing from this particular side, left part of the upper limb, the right part, which are basically the same. And therefore, from this point, we're going to see that there's this particular section that we refer to as the girdle, which is basically consists of what we call the pelvis, which is formed by this bone known as the ilium, and then we have another one that is known as the pubis, and then lastly we have what we call the ischium, which basically is illustrated at this particular point. So in this case, this is just referred to as the pelvis. So therefore, this first illustration is going to assist us in trying to figure out different parts of this particular section of the human support system that I've mentioned, which is pelvis. Therefore, we're also going to see that the lower part of the limb is made up of the femur, which forms part of the leg, and the patella. This is the disc-like bone which is found at the knee, which is known as the patella. Therefore, from there we are going to see that the lower part of the limb is made up of the fibula and tibia. Just like the ulna and the radius on the upper part, the lower part is made up of the fibula and tibia, which articulate the lower parts of the limb that we're going to see here being mentioned as the tarsus, proximal, phalanx, just like this one. So the legs are going to contain also part of this section, which is of course analogous to the upper part of the limbs. This is the middle phalanx and then the distal phalanx, which are of course articulated to this particular part of the lower limb. So in this case, as we can see, this particular name in this case is going to be referred to as phalanges, metatarsus and tarsus, this particular illustration for our second case. Now, as I've mentioned, this skeletal system, as I've listed from upper to the lower, it's made up of different bones depending on their shapes and functions. And basically from this, we are going to see that the classification is based on their shapes. We can be able to identify long bones like the femur that I've referred to, in this case for the lower limb. And also we're going to see that these particular long bones are mostly found in the appendicular skeleton, which is of course forming part of the section that we said that is very essential for movement. Now for the flat bones, we're going to see that basically the skull and these shoulder plates, and this is the ilium, which is part of the pelvis, are made up of flat bones, which are going to assist in perhaps articulation of muscles and protection of the internal organs that we said, which are very delicate. Now the part of this skeletal system that are mentioned by the name patella, this basically is known as sesamoid bone. It's a part of the classification of bones apart from the long bones and flat bones. The third one is sesamoid bones. An example of them, these are patella, which are small round bones, and basically they are mostly found in the tendons of hands, knees, and the feet, like the ones I had said, which are articulating at the upper and lower part of the limb of the human skeletal system. Now short bones is the last part of this classification. Now apart from the long bones, flat bones, and the sesamoid bones, we have what we call short bones. And the short bone consists of some of the bones like the carpus. I believe that's pronunciation, I don't know why it's correct, but it's a carpus, which are made up of course of the upper part of the limb and lower part of the limb that we're going to see, which consists of short bones like the tarsus. The tarsus, which are made up of the lower part of the limb, consists of what we refer to as short bones. Now lastly, there are other bones which make up the skeletal system, which are basically we cannot be able to classify them as either sesamoid, short, flat, or long bones. They are referred to as irregular shaped bones. And basically, if we can try to look at this, of course we're going to learn about the vertebral column in an exclusive video. But as I said, this one is articulated to one another through the vertebral discs. And these are referred to as irregular bones now that we cannot be able to give them shape as a long, short, or sesamoid bones. and their function is basically to protect the spinal cord that of course is articulated to the brain, as I mentioned. Now from this we can be able to appreciate that apart from the skeletal system that we said that replaces the functionality of movement, there's this aspect of shapes and shapes of bones which are playing different roles, like protection of internal organs and perhaps trying to play a role, as we are going to see in articulation, in an expanded, or rather in an explained way. We're going to see that these different parts of the bone have different parts as well, which are going to be expanded in order to show their specific roles. Like as I said, the vertebral column, we have what we call the atlas and axis, which we are going to see have different features which are going to assist in functions like articulation and movement. Now that's basically forms the summary of the classification of bones. Now in a nutshell, we have said that the classification of bones is based on their shapes and functions, and we have 5 different categories or classifications of these specific bones of the skeletal system. The first one we said is long bones, and we gave an example of femur, which is found on the lower limb. And the second one is a flat bone. Of course, we're going to see different types of flat bones being displayed on this. Talked about number 3, the sesamoid bones, and we gave an example of a patella that is found, of course, in the knee of the human skeletal system. And the short bones, which we said forms part of the hand and the feet. Example are the corpus, and then the tarsals, which are found on the feet. And lastly, I've said that we have what we call irregular shaped bones, and the example of them is the vertebral column that forms part of the axial part of the human skeletal system. Now I hope that this is going to assist us in trying to discuss other videos which are going to, of course, try to look at these different parts of the bones that we have mentioned and try to see how their different features facilitate their specific functions, and how we can be able to, of course, explain these different parts of the bones and some of the features that we are going to find on them. So in that case, I'm going to wind up our discussion for the classification of bones at that specific point. I hope that it's going to assist us in trying to understand other videos that we are going to do after this. So that is it for now. Bye. Thank you. God bless you.